I'm talking about computers that cost hundreds of millions to develop and sold almost nothing. Computers that were technically superior but lost anyway. Computers that destroyed their creators' reputations, bankrupted entire companies, and in one case, almost killed Apple before the Mac even existed. These aren't just forgotten computers. These are computers people want to forget. Tonight, I'm telling you about 5 of them. And trust me, after you hear these stories, you'll understand why nobody talks about them anymore. If you're into computer history, retro tech, and the dark side of Silicon Valley, the tech that failed, the stories nobody wants to tell, the people who got destroyed along the way, subscribe. Alright, let's get into it. We're starting with Apple. Before the Mac, before the success, Apple almost died because of one computer. 1978. Apple is riding high on the success of the Apple II. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak are rich. Apple is growing fast, and they want their next big thing. Jobs starts a new project, the Lisa, named after his daughter, though he denied it for years because he was kind of a terrible father at the time. But that's another story. The Lisa was supposed to be revolutionary. First commercial computer with a graphical user interface, windows, icons, a mouse, everything we take for granted today. Jobs visited Xerox PARC, saw their GUI research, and basically said, "We're making this, but better." Apple poured everything into the Lisa. By 1979, 1980, they had hundreds of engineers working on it. The budget kept growing. 50 million, 100 million, eventually over $150 million. This was Apple's future, and Steve Jobs was running it. This was his baby. He was obsessed with every detail, changing specs constantly, yelling at engineers, being Steve Jobs. But in 1980, something happens. The Apple board, specifically Mike Markkula and Mike Scott, they're getting worried. Jobs is too erratic, too controlling, too immature. He's 25 years old, and he's burning through money without shipping anything. So they do something brutal. They remove Steve Jobs from the Lisa project, his own project, the computer named after his daughter. They just kick him off it. Jobs is furious, humiliated. So what does he do? He takes over this small side project that nobody cares about, the Macintosh. He's determined to make the Mac ship before the Lisa, make it better than the Lisa, just to prove everyone wrong. Meanwhile, the Lisa team, now led by John Couch, they're relieved Jobs is gone. They can finally work without someone screaming at them. But they're also behind schedule and over budget. January 1983, the Lisa finally launches. And on paper, it's incredible. Full GUI, 1 megabyte of RAM, huge for the time, 5 megahertz processor, built-in hard drive. This is the most advanced personal computer ever made. The problem? It costs $9,995. Almost $10,000. In 1983, you could buy a car for that. You could buy 5 IBM PCs for that. And it's slow, like painfully slow. The GUI looks beautiful, but everything takes forever. Opening a file, saving a document, you're just sitting there waiting. The technology wasn't ready for what Apple was trying to do. Reviews are mixed. Everyone agrees it's impressive technically, but nobody can justify the price. And businesses, the target market, they're already committed to IBM PCs. They're not going to spend $10,000 on an Apple when IBM's cost $2,000. Sales are terrible. Apple projected 50,000 units in the first year. They sell less than 10,000. It's a disaster. January 1984. Steve Jobs launches the Macintosh. It has most of the Lisa's features, costs $2,495. Still expensive, but not insane, and it's actually fast enough to use. The famous 1984 Super Bowl ad plays, and the Mac becomes a cultural phenomenon. The Lisa is dead on arrival. Jobs made sure of it. He took all the good ideas from the Lisa, made them affordable, and left the Lisa to die. This was personal. This was revenge for being kicked off the project. 1985. Apple officially kills the Lisa. They've lost over $100 million on it. They have thousands of unsold units sitting in warehouses. In 1989, they literally buried them in a landfill in Utah just to get a tax write-off. Buried them like they were toxic waste. The Lisa team, most of them got fired or quit. Their resumes were tainted. Worked on the Lisa was code for worked on Apple's biggest failure. John Couch, who led the project after Jobs left, he ended up leaving Apple. His career never really recovered. Here's the thing about the Lisa. It had all the right ideas. It pioneered the GUI. It showed what personal computers could become. The Macintosh, Windows, everything we use today. It all traces back to the Lisa. But Apple doesn't want you to remember that. In their official history, they act like the Mac came first. They barely mention the Lisa. Steve Jobs, in interviews before he died, would brush off questions about it. "Oh, that was before I learned how to ship products on time and on budget." But the Lisa almost killed Apple. If it had been their only product, they would have gone bankrupt. They survived because the Apple II was still selling, and because Jobs, ironically, saved them with the Mac. The Lisa is the forgotten computer that made everything possible, and it's forgotten because it was such an expensive, humiliating failure that nobody wants to talk about it. Early 1980s. IBM is dominating business computers. The IBM PC is the standard. Everyone in corporate America uses IBM, but IBM looks at the home computer market, Apple II, Commodore 64, and they want in. They want to make a computer for families, for kids, for home use, something affordable, but with the IBM name. So they create the PCjr. And IBM is so confident about this, they invest massive amounts of money. They're building custom chips, designing new peripherals, planning huge marketing campaigns. This is IBM's entry into your home. And they're not messing around. They plan to ship in time for Christmas, 1983. That's the key retail season. If they can get it in stores for Christmas, it'll be a hit. November 1983, the PCjr launches. And immediately, everyone can see it's a disaster. First, the keyboard. IBM designed this chiclet keyboard, tiny rubber keys that feel horrible to type on. It's so bad that typing on it is physically painful after like 10 minutes. And this is a computer. Typing is the main thing you do with it. Second, the specs are garbage. IBM intentionally crippled it so it wouldn't compete with their business PCs. It has 64 kilobytes of RAM, when everyone else has 128 kilobytes or more. It can't run most PC software. The graphics are mediocre. It's underpowered for its own good. Third, the price. They're trying to compete with the Commodore 64, which costs $600. The PCjr costs $669 for the base model. But that model is useless. If you want enough RAM to actually do anything, it's $1,269, almost double a Commodore. Fourth, it's incompatible with IBM PC software, so you can't even use it with business software you already have. It's in this weird limbo. Too expensive for a toy, too weak for business. The tech press absolutely demolishes the PCjr, and I mean demolishes. PC Magazine calls it a disappointment. InfoWorld says it's crippled by design. ByT Magazine runs a review titled PCjr Too Little, Too Late. But the absolute best or worst is when journalists start calling it the PC Jr. as an insult, like it's a toy, a child's computer. That nickname stuck, and IBM hated it. Consumer Reports, the magazine that normal families read, they rate it not recommended. That's the kiss of death. Moms and dads aren't gonna buy something Consumer Reports says to avoid. Sales for Christmas, 1983 are way below projections. IBM keeps cutting the price, but it doesn't help. Nobody wants it. 1984, IBM tries to save it. They release a better keyboard, admitting the chiclet keyboard was a mistake. They add more RAM options. They cut prices again. They're basically admitting the whole thing was botched. But the damage is done. The PCjr has a reputation as a joke. Saturday Night Live did a sketch making fun of it. A Saturday Night Live sketch. That's how badly IBM screwed this up. March 1985. Barely 16 months after launch, IBM discontinues the PCjr. They just kill it. No successor, no redesign. Just done. IBM lost somewhere between $50 and $100 million on the PCjr. And worse than the money, they lost credibility. IBM, the company that couldn't fail, had just released one of the worst computers ever made. The people who worked on the PCjr, most of them were reassigned to other projects. IBM doesn't fire people easily, but your career at IBM after working on the PCjr, it was basically over. You were marked as someone who worked on the joke. The PCjr didn't kill IBM. They were too big to fail. But it taught them that the home computer market wasn't easy, that the IBM name alone wasn't enough. After the PCjr, IBM became more conservative. They stopped trying to innovate in personal computers. They just made business machines. And that's why, by the 1990s, companies like Dell and Compaq took over because IBM had been burned so badly by the PCjr that they just gave up on trying to be innovative. The PCjr is the computer that proved even IBM could fail, and fail spectacularly. 1985. Commodore releases the Amiga 1000, and it's genuinely revolutionary. This computer is years ahead of everything else. The graphics are insane. 4,096 colors when IBM PCs could only do 16. The sound is incredible. 4-channel stereo. It can multitask, which almost no other home computer can do. It has custom chips for graphics and sound that won't be matched for years. The Amiga becomes the computer for creative professionals. Video production, music production, 3D animation. If you're doing anything creative in the late 80s and early 90s, you're probably using an Amiga. The Amiga is so advanced that TV studios use it for special effects. Babylon 5 was made on Amigas. Music artists like The Prodigy made entire albums on Amigas. This is the computer that should have dominated the 90s. But there's a problem. Commodore, the company, was a disaster. Total dysfunction. The CEO was a guy named Irving Gould, and he was more interested in extracting money from the company than growing it. He'd put his relatives in executive positions, pay them huge salaries, and they'd do nothing. Commodore had no real marketing budget. The Amiga could do incredible things, but nobody outside of enthusiasts knew about it. Meanwhile, Apple was spending millions on Mac ads, and IBM compatibles were everywhere. And internally, there was constant warfare. Engineers hated the executives. Executives were fighting each other for power. Nobody was actually focused on making Commodore successful. They were focused on surviving the internal politics. Early 1990s, the PC market is moving forward. Windows 3.0 comes out, and suddenly, PCs have decent graphics. The Mac is getting better. Commodore needs to respond. But instead of updating the Amiga, instead of investing in next-gen technology, Commodore leadership makes a bizarre decision. They focus on the Commodore CD-TV, a multimedia CD player that's basically an Amiga disguised as a stereo component. It's a stupid idea. Nobody wants this. It's too expensive as a CD player, not good enough as a computer. It flops immediately. And while they're wasting money on CD-TV, the Amiga is stagnating. The technology that was years ahead in 1985 is now being matched by PCs and Macs. And Commodore isn't innovating fast enough to stay ahead. By 1993, Commodore is bleeding money. They're losing millions every quarter. Retailers are dropping them. Software developers are abandoning the platform for Windows and Mac. The Amiga community, the die-hard fans, they're begging Commodore to do something. Release a new model, lower prices, market the damn thing. But nothing happens. The company is paralyzed. April 29th, 1994, Commodore files for bankruptcy. One of the most important computer companies in history, the company that made the Commodore 64 and the Amiga, is just dead. The Amiga technology gets sold off to a German company, then to another company, then to another. It bounces around for years, each owner doing less with it than the last. The Amiga becomes this zombie property that technically exists, but nobody cares about. And the people who worked on the Amiga, the engineers who created this revolutionary technology, they scattered. Some went to Apple, some to Silicon Graphics. Some left the industry entirely. There's this famous story. After Commodore went bankrupt, some of the Amiga engineers met at a bar. They got drunk and started crying because they'd built something incredible, something that should have changed computing, and it died because the company was run by incompetent, greedy idiots. The Amiga should have been what the Mac became. It had better technology. It was more affordable. It could do things the Mac couldn't. But technology doesn't matter if the business is broken. Commodore proved that you can have the best product and still die if your leadership is incompetent. Today, the Amiga is remembered fondly by a small community of enthusiasts, There are Amiga emulators, hobbyist projects, people keeping it alive, but it's a ghost, a memory of what could have been if Commodore hadn't destroyed itself from the inside. The Amiga didn't fail. Commodore failed the Amiga. All right, two more. Steve Jobs burning millions in his wilderness years, and the British computer that destroyed a man right before his biggest catastrophe. These last two, way darker than the first three. 1985, Steve Jobs gets forced out of Apple. The company he founded, the company he built, kicks him out, and Jobs is furious, humiliated, and determined to prove everyone wrong. So he starts Next Computer. His plan is simple: build the most advanced computer ever made, sell it to universities and researchers, and show Apple they made a mistake. This is gonna be his revenge. Jobs recruits some of Apple's best engineers, people who are loyal to him. He gets funding from Ross Perot and Canon, over $100 million, and he goes all in on creating this perfect computer. Everything about the Next Computer is obsessively designed. The case is a perfect cube made of magnesium. The software is revolutionary, object-oriented programming, built-in networking, Unix-based. Tim Berners-Lee actually invented the World Wide Web on a Next Computer. That's how advanced it was. But Jobs is Steve Jobs, which means he's obsessed with perfection to an insane degree. The case has to be a perfect cube, exactly 1 foot on each side. The magnesium has to be finished in a specific way. The screws have to be hidden. The factory making them has to be pristine. Jobs demands it looks like an art gallery, not a factory. All of this costs insane amounts of money, and it takes forever. Next is supposed to ship in 1987. It doesn't. 1988. Still not ready. Jobs keeps delaying because it's not perfect yet. The board, including Ross Perot, who invested millions, they're getting worried. Jobs is burning through money and not shipping anything. They've seen this before. This is the Lisa all over again. October 1988. 3 years after starting Next, Jobs finally launches the Next Computer. And it's beautiful, technologically advanced, impressive. It also costs $6,500. And that's for the base model. If you want the optional hard drive, which you absolutely need, it's $10,000. $10,000. For a computer targeted at universities and students. College students are supposed to buy $10,000 computers. In 1988, sales are abysmal. Next projected they'd sell 10,000 in the first year. They sell about 400. Universities look at the price and say, we could buy 5 PCs for this. Students can't afford it. Researchers are interested, but their institutions won't pay for it. And it gets worse. The Next Computer can't print to most printers. It needs special expensive Next printers. The software, while advanced, is incompatible with everything else. You're locked into the Next ecosystem, which almost nobody is in. 1989, 1990, 1991. Next keeps releasing new models, cutting prices, but nothing works. They're hemorrhaging money. Ross Perot is furious. He invested $20 million and got basically nothing. 1993. Next stops making hardware entirely. They pivot to just selling the operating system. This is Jobs admitting defeat. The hardware business he was so obsessed with, the perfect cube, all of it was a failure. By the mid-90s, Next is basically dead. They're a tiny software company that nobody cares about, surviving on consulting contracts. Jobs' big comeback, his revenge on Apple, his proof that he was right, it failed. Jobs lost over $100 million on Next. His investors lost hundreds of millions. And his reputation. People in Silicon Valley were saying Jobs was washed up, that he'd gotten lucky with Apple, but didn't actually know what he was doing. Here's the twist. 1997. Apple is dying. They need a new operating system desperately, and they buy Next for $400 million. Not because the company was successful, because they needed the operating system Jobs had built. The technology that nobody bought became the foundation for Mac OS X, for iOS, for everything Apple does today. So Jobs saved Apple with Next, but only after spending 12 years and hundreds of millions of dollars failing first, and only because Apple was desperate enough to buy it. Next wasn't a success story. It was a 12-year, $100 million failure that accidentally became useful when Apple ran out of options. The next computer itself? Completely forgotten. It's in museums now. A beautiful, expensive, perfectly designed failure that almost nobody bought. We talked about Clive Sinclair and the C5 electric vehicle in a previous video, but before the C5 destroyed his reputation, there was another Sinclair failure that almost killed his company, the Sinclair QL, 1984. Sinclair is riding high on the ZX Spectrum's success. He's a millionaire, a national hero in Britain, and he announces his next computer, the QL Quantum Leap. The QL is supposed to be Sinclair's entry into the business market, more powerful than the Spectrum, designed for offices, with a real operating system and business software. This is Sinclair's IBM killer, and he promises it'll launch in January 1984. He takes pre-orders. Thousands of people pay in advance. Sinclair is confident he's never failed to deliver before. Except there's a massive problem. When Sinclair announced the QL in January 1984, it didn't exist, like at all. There were prototypes, sure, but they didn't work properly. The hardware had bugs. The software wasn't finished. The operating system crashed constantly. It was nowhere near ready to ship. But Sinclair had already taken money from pre-orders. He'd promised delivery. So what does he do? He ships them anyway. In April 1984, Sinclair starts sending out QLs to customers who had pre-ordered. And these computers, they don't work. They crash. They freeze. The keyboard ribbon cables are too short, so they pop out during use. The microdrives, the storage system, are unreliable. People are receiving brand new computers that are essentially broken, and Sinclair's customer service is overwhelmed with complaints. The British tech press turns on Sinclair. Reviews are brutal. Half-baked, rushed to market, a disaster. One magazine runs a headline. QL, quite lamentable. And here's where it gets dark. Sinclair doesn't recall them. He doesn't offer refunds. He just keeps shipping broken computers and promises he'll fix the bugs with updates later. Customers who paid money for a business computer are stuck with the expensive paperweight. Some of them sue. Most just write angry letters and never buy Sinclair products again. By late 1984, the QL's reputation is destroyed. Businesses won't touch it. Consumers see it as proof that Sinclair rushed a product to market. Sales collapse. Sinclair sold maybe 150,000 QLs total. For context, the ZX Spectrum sold over 5 million. The QL was supposed to be his next big thing. Instead, it was a humiliation. 1985. The QL failure is costing Sinclair Research millions. They're doing layoffs. They're cutting budgets. The company that was thriving 2 years ago is now struggling. And then Sinclair releases the C5 electric vehicle, which fails even worse than the QL. By 1986, Sinclair Research is effectively dead. They sell the computer business to Amstrad for basically nothing. Sinclair keeps the company name, but it's a shell. No employees, no products, nothing. And Clive Sinclair, the man who brought affordable computing to Britain, who made the ZX80 and ZX81 and ZX Spectrum, who should be remembered as a pioneer. He's remembered for two spectacular failures, the QL and the C5. The QL specifically showed that Sinclair had become arrogant. He thought he could ship a broken product, and people would accept it because he was Clive Sinclair. They didn't, and it cost him his company. Today, if you mention the Sinclair QL, even computer enthusiasts don't remember it. It's been completely overshadowed by the C5 disaster. But the QL was actually the beginning of the end for Sinclair. It was the first sign that he'd lost touch, that he was more interested in showing off technology than making products people could actually use. The few QLs that still exist are collector's items now, not because they're valuable, because they're rare. Most of them got thrown away. Nobody wanted them. The Sinclair QL is the forgotten failure before the famous failure, and it's a perfect example of how arrogance and impatience can destroy even the most successful companies. So there you have it. 5 computers that time forgot. The Apple Lisa, Apple's $150 million disaster that Steve Jobs destroyed as revenge. The IBM PCjr, proof that even IBM could release a joke of a computer. The Commodore Amiga, the most advanced computer of its era, killed by incompetent management. The next computer, Steve Jobs, 12-year, $100 million exercise in hubris. And the Sinclair QL, the rushed failure that started Clive Sinclair's collapse. And here's what connects all of them. They were all good ideas. The Lisa pioneered the GUI. The PCjr could have brought IBM into homes. The Amiga was technically superior. The next computer was genuinely innovative. The QL had potential. But good ideas aren't enough. The Lisa was too expensive. The PCjr was crippled by design. The Amiga was destroyed by corporate dysfunction. The next was priced for people who didn't exist. The QL was shipped before it was ready. These computers failed because the companies behind them made bad decisions. And those bad decisions cost billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, and destroyed careers. That's why they're forgotten. Not because they weren't important, because remembering them is embarrassing. If you want more stories about forgotten tech and the dark side of Silicon Valley, subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more. And let me know in the comments. Did you ever use any of these computers? A Lisa? An Amiga? Did your parents buy a PCjr? I'd love to hear about it. Alright, see you in the next one.